Hello, my name is Frank Uekötter. I'm a professor at Ruhr University Bochum in Germany. I'm the principal investigator of the ERC Advanced Grant Project, the Making of Monoculture, a Global History, or MaMoGH for short. And with this video, I'd like to explain what we're doing and how we approach monoculture. The goal of the MaMoGH project is to provide a better understanding of monocultures everywhere on our planet. Of course, we're not the first people who think about monoculture as something that is inherently problematic. In fact, the word is, in some respects, toxic. There are plenty of studies of individual monocultures and their problems in different parts of the world. But I think the time has come to view these individual problems of monoculture as part of a global project to make monoculture work. And that's what we analyze in this project. Now, being a good academic, I will start with a definition. What is monoculture? Well, for a research group, monoculture is a form of magical thinking. And if I say magic, I don't mean something about supernatural forces or superstition. Magic is something that you cannot explain rationally, because that is the amazing thing about monoculture. Monocultures exist everywhere on this globe. If you look at the cotton fields of the American South, if you look at banana plantations in Latin America, about soybeans from Brazil, eucalyptus forest in India, or cardamon, which is a project that one of us is looking at, you see many different kinds of monoculture. Wherever we look on the planet in the era of global modernity, we see that organic production gravitates towards a reliance on one and only one product. So monocultures are everywhere, but there is a conceptual vacuum at the heart of this global endeavor. There is no satisfactory concept of monoculture, no paradigm that people follow. And that's a pretty unique situation. If you think about other projects that define global modernity, be it the rule of law, be it capitalist markets, be it academic research on a personal note, wherever you look, you have a certain set of rules, you have a certain idea about how things should work. Now, we all know that the reality is messier than these lofty ideals, but at least you have a certain idea of how things should work. There is nothing like that for monoculture, and there is plenty of conceptual and empirical evidence for the opposite, for the many problems of monoculture. Now, when I say this, it's crucial to recognize that, no, this is not the wisdom of hindsight. Wherever you look, you see doubts in the monocultures of this world. And these doubts are not from externals. They're not about the side effects. They are coming from the very heart of monocultures. Let me give you an example from one of our case studies, which deals with the citrus industry in Florida. In Florida, citrus is traditionally one of the two big agricultural sectors. Cattle ranching was the other. And it was so big, in fact, that there was a distinct division from the Florida government that dealt with citrus affairs, founded in the 1930s and in existence to this day. In 1939, the Department of Agriculture for the state of Florida published a bulletin on citrus growing in Florida. If you read that, you might expect that this offers emphatic praise for citrus groves. Well, actually, the advice of the government at that time was pretty much the contrary. The advice was, do not rely on citrus alone because, and I quote, one crop farming has never been entirely satisfactory to the farmers who have tried it. Where there is a diversity of crops, the labor and equipment can be much more efficiently employed throughout the year than where only one crop is produced, unquote. Look at this quote and see that it is about the very interest of the producers, not just about the side effects. And yes, Florida citrus had many side effects too, and so did many other monocultures. So, what is driving the quest for monoculture in the absence of a clear paradigm? Well, we think it's about several things that came together in what one might term a perfect storm. The first is the license to unlimited greed that is inherent in global capitalism. I don't think I need to elaborate at great length because the evidence for this greed is all around us, but it's crucial to recognize that it is a departure from centuries, if not millennia, of working the land under a subsistence paradigm. Producing food is something that is at the very heart of human civilization. And for a long time, it was first and foremost about human survival. Well, in the era of global modernity, it is about getting rich or the attempt thereof. Second, there is a culture of improvement. The idea is that nature was and is up for improvement through new innovations, the means of science and technology. And there is a spirit that this works to some extent at a price. production has become more plentiful, more productive, more resilient in some respects, thanks to a culture of improvement. There's a third thing that defines monocultures, namely the idea that things will get simpler if you focus on one and only one species. And it's an amazing idea from the point of view of a historian, because time and again we see that, well, things don't actually become less complicated if you go towards monoculture. Monocultures are not easier, they're complicated in their own distinct ways. And yet this idea, this quest for simplicity, refuses to die. It's one of those ideas that you find disproved time and again, and yet the idea refuses to die. There's a fourth thing that defines monoculture, and it's not just about instruments and hopes and aspirations, but it's about the style of dealing with monocultures. Monocultures, our core argument, monocultures operate in permanent battle mode. And yes, the military metaphor is intentional. I think we should see the men of monoculture, and yes, many of them are men. You cannot talk about monoculture unless you are willing to look at it through a gender lens. This is a distinctly masculine project, and I think we should see the men of monocultures as something like soldiers of monoculture, because if you look at them and compare them to the modern soldier, you see that there is so much that they have in common. There is the teamwork, the reliance on sophisticated technology, the special codes, the language, the hierarchies, and the firm conviction that nobody outside their own sphere really understands what they're doing. What all this comes down to is that the real reason why monocultures are still with us are, well, we can make them work. The history of monoculture is about crisis management on many fronts, and it's an ongoing endeavor with very little hope that there will ever be something like stability. And that is something that we take very serious in our research, because that's really what we explore. How do monocultures manage crisis? How do they deal with them? And what does it mean for lives and minds, for societies and environments to work in permanent crisis mode, or battle mode, if you wish? We do so with a range of case studies on various monocultures around the globe, different commodities, different parts of the world. We look at the patterns, the ways of dealing with crisis, recurring tools, recurring characters, recurring mindsets, enabling contexts. And we do this with a double goal. We publish case studies on these different monocultures, but our ultimate goal is to move beyond the case studies, to develop a framework that works for monocultures everywhere. Our goal is to come up with a framework that people thinking about monoculture, working on monocultures, can deal everywhere on this planet. And this framework will allow people to better understand monocultures as they've grown historically, and understand monocultures in a more sophisticated way, because monocultures persist in our time. This is a project of history, but this history is not a closed chapter, quite the contrary. In many ways, we're living in an age where the problems of monoculture become more egregious, more dramatic than ever. And the goal is to study this as something that happened in the past, but also something that is ongoing. And our goal is to bring our insights into the ongoing conversation about feeding the world. And if you want to speak to people beyond the ivory tower as an academic, well, one of the key things is you need to start speaking the language. The language of agriculture is to a very great extent economics. And if you know anything about economics, you know, well, if you want to make it in economics, you need to have a law in your own name. Now, talking about laws is something that is a bit against the nature of the academic historian. It's really something that, it's not a business that we have much investment in, but then there are different ways to talk about laws in history. My inspiration comes from Elinor Ostrom, the famous economist who was the first woman to win the Nobel Award for Economics. I guess many viewers of this video will be familiar with her book, Governing the Commons. What is probably less recognized is that Ostrom was also a critic of excessive modeling. She called her own work on the commons a framework rather than a model. And that's something that resonates with me. We should be more critical of modeling. And revealingly, Ostrom's law is not a law that Ostrom proclaimed herself. It was proclaimed by Lee Fennell upon the 20th anniversary of the publication of Governing the Commons. Lee Fennell works at the University of Chicago. And if there is one place on this globe that knows about what economics means, what it means to be a man in economics, I guess that place is the University of Chicago. So that's the occasion when Lee Fennell proclaimed Ostrom's law, and it reads, and I quote, "A resource arrangement that works in practice can work in theory." That's powerful, but I think you can push that further. It can push further because we need to capture this need for perennial crisis management. We need a way to conceptualize this constant quest for solutions, most of which are temporary rather than permanent. We need a way to capture the distraction that goes with it, which can be creative distraction or just simple distraction. The argument at the core of the MaMoGH project is we need to write the history of food in the modern era as a kind of global improvisation theater, as a global stumble that has worked against all odds, at least for the time being, that may continue, or everything that we see right now is just a prelude for the fall. We do not know about the future of monoculture, but we know that it is one of the big trouble spots. And we need a way to conceptualize this ongoing improvisation. So in this spirit, and without further ado, let me conclude by presenting you with the law that should guide the study of monocultures worldwide. A resource arrangement that cannot work in theory can stumble on in practice. That is what I would like to call Frank's Law of Monoculture. And I hope you appreciate the law as well as the acronym that goes with it, FLOM. And no, it's not a coincidence that you cannot cite FLOM without a smile.